Hello everyone, I am Jose Arvizu and I'm doing my presentation on Cuba and the effect that Spanish colonization had on the food culture there. To start off, here's the map and a few history points about Cuba. As you can see on the map, it's an island, a group of islands actually, called a archipelago, which is a chain of group of islands that is clustered together in a body of water. So I'm going to focus my presentation on the Spanish colonization, which is when Columbus arrived in the year 1492. That's when Spanish took over, and they actually had the land until the Spanish-American War in 1898 when America took over the land. All right, to get into the geography and the climate, Cuba has a very tropical climate, which has both a dry and rainy season. The dry season is from November to April, and the rainy season is from May to October. As you can see, there's not too many mountains. There is some, and you can see in the topographic map right there. Most of the land is lower altitudes, closer to zero. There are many rolling plains, fertile valleys, which is good for growing crops. And they are also vulnerable to tropical hurricanes. So this can be good and bad. It can help bring moisture to a lot of the soil around the area, but it can also ruin a lot of the habitat because of the hurricanes throughout the years. In Cuba, there was also native tribes, which were known as the Taino tribe, which is the main tribe that lived there. They were hunter-gatherers. They mostly dealt with small land animals like reptiles, snakes, chickens, small stuff like that. They had tons of seafood, from fish to actually hunting. They actually hunted sea lions as well, and manatees, which were one of the bigger mammals that they had in their area. When it came to land, they created an agricultural system known as conucos, which you can see in the picture. It's kind of like rows of vegetables, plants, a mixture of each. This allowed for the soil to stay fertile and for agriculture to boom over time. You can also see this is something that's used a lot nowadays too, with fields out here. You can see I guess a foot of dirt pile. That's where they'll plant their seeds and fruits. So in Cuba, the native plants that were there before Columbus, it was manioc, which was a starchy root. This was used a lot to make flour, which they then would make cassave, which I'll get into in a bit. They also had sweet potatoes, maize, which is basically corn. They had beans and squash. They also had pineapples, which was harvested a lot in Cuba. They then also had tobacco and cotton. Also, some fun facts. They also had a lot of medicinal plants that they would use during spiritual healings and, for medicinal issues. They used the papaya a lot, actually, for digestive issues. I did not include that, but that was a pretty fun fact as well. Current meals before colonization was known as the cassave, as I said before. It was made by the manioc plant, which was a starchy root that they would then turn into a flour and then make these kind of like bread crust, as you can see right here. They also had the guiso de pimientos, which was a pepper pot. This was a pot, usually had some type of protein, so small animals, chicken, meat. They would add peppers, vegetables from that area. They also had barbacoa, which is actually, I looked into it, it was actually what started barbecue. So they're one of the first people to start barbecue. To do barbacoa, you would have a pit where it would be about 3 to 4 feet deep. They would line the pit with leaves and then start the fire at the bottom. They would then add another layer of leaves after the fire was hot, and they would place their meat there for either a day or hours, depending on how tender they wanted their meat. It would be a low burning fire, so it would not be enough to burn the food that was in there. They also used many preservation tactics to keep their food fresh, which was like slowly smoking their foods, and this would actually allow it to be preserved in their hot tropical climates. To get into the plants that Columbus introduced, as you can see right here, it was sugarcane, which was brought through Columbus as well. And they also started to use sugar, obviously, from the plants. There was also wheat, barley, and rice, coffee, a lot of citrus fruits. They had mostly small fruits, berries, nothing like this. They also brought over bananas, which became abundant in Cuba because of the tropical climate. Also were garden vegetables, which included cabbage, lettuce, radishes, and also melons. Not only did Columbus bring plants like this, he also introduced mammals to Cuba. Some of these mammals were shown here. They were pigs, horses, cattle, which included cows, bulls, calves, goats, and sheep as well. These animals were all actually introduced into different meals, which we can get into as well. So, some new dishes that came with Columbus was the ropa vieja. This is actually considered one of Cuba's national dish now. It is a stew of shredded beef with a tomato sauce, and it actually came from a similar Spanish dish. The moros y cristianos. This is basically rice and beans, black beans and rice. It was inspired also by the Spanish, who brought rice and beans. And in English, moros y cristianos means Moors and Christians, which is like a symbolic meaning because of the black beans and the white rice. Lechon asado was another star dish. This was where the pig was introduced. It was slow roasted pork. And they introduced many of their sauces and spices from the land, which actually took a couple hours to make because of how you had to slow roast a pig. Another good dish is picadillo. This is a savory, sweet kind of ground beef mixture. It's actually huge a lot across Latin America. I've tried this myself as Mexican. My mom makes this a lot. It's pretty good. Also was the arroz con pollo, which translates to chicken and rice. This was something that was already a bit of a staple, but the rice that Columbus brought over became very important to the Cuban culture. Okay, so to recap what happened, I think the introduction of Columbus, it allowed for a lot of new ingredients into Cuba, from mammals to new vegetables. This allowed for a lot of variations of the foods that you can go back. Like the ropa vieja, it was kind of like barbacoa, but instead of small protein mammals, they were now using shredded beef, so they were able to make a lot larger meals. Also, the moros and cristianos was another one that seems to be a very popular dish in Cuba now. This all would have never happened if it weren't for Spanish colonization in Cuba. And I think this is very important because if you go back, you can see that the Taino tribes were the original people in Cuba. They had a lot of hunter-gatherer meals, which they were basically leaves, fruits, vegetables, any fish that they could find. Large fish to the manatees, which are probably the only big animals that they could have there to serve a whole community. So with these new foods, I'm sure agriculture began to grow a lot. People began to grow. They were having a lot more kids now. They were able to feed everyone, and I'm sure there was almost never a food shortage now. Also because of the cattle. They not only brought old grown cattle, they brought calves as well. So this led to there being an abundance of cattle all throughout Cuba. And if you go look at meals now, you can see that it's no longer just wheat and small vegetables that are being used in meals. It's mostly a lot of pork and a lot of cattle type of foods that are brought into their dishes. So this was my presentation on Cuba. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I actually really want to try these foods now that I have researched them and looked into them. It seems a lot similar to Mexican food, which I eat a lot, but we'll see if it's good. Thank you.